Welcome back to Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. And whether you are selling a product, a service, an idea, or an initiative, chances are hope is creeping in just a little bit more than you would prefer. How do I know that? Well, I was able to work with some of the highest performing teams on the planet, teams where life and death that was on the line every single day. You better believe that they were always looking at, even though they were some of the best in the world at what they did, always looking at where hope was entering their plan. And their mission every day was to identify those places and replace that hope. So here at Bulletproof Selling, we take that same methodology, that same mindset, and we move it into business. Since day one here at Bulletproof Selling, we've been bringing on guests to help us identify where they see salespeople and business leaders relying on hope more than they should. In every single show, whether I'm speaking with a Hall of Fame speaker, a best-selling author, somebody that's out there on the front lines with salespeople every day, we build a system on every single show to remove hope from that aspect of the sales cycle, a system that you can use no matter the size of your goals or the size of your team. Now, over the course of 140 plus episodes here at Bulletproof Selling, every single one of them generating a sales system, we've been able to cover quite a bit, from how we develop better ideal client profiles, how we conduct better outreach, how we drive more meetings, what we do during those meetings to provide more value, build better relationships, how to develop better teams, how to hire and recruit and train, all the way to how do we generate more referrals or even get paid faster after the sale. If you're looking for any specific sales system, chances are it exists over at battlefieldselling.com. But one area that we don't get to touch on a whole lot is the philosophy of why systems are so necessary for salespeople. How to identify if I even need a system in that particular spot. So I'm very excited to introduce today's guest. Moustafa Moursy, the president of Push Analytics, has had some interesting job titles in the past. One of them I'm really interested to dive into, which is sales engineer. This is not something you hear about a whole lot, but it speaks to Moustafa's mindset about the value of systems in sales. So without further ado, to talk about the value of systems in general for salespeople and to help us, I think, develop a good way to identify where systems are actually necessary, it's my pleasure to welcome onto the show Mr. Moustafa Moursy. Moustafa, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So, Moustafa, one quick glance at your LinkedIn profile tells me you have been in sales for a hot minute. Walk us through a little bit about your sales career, your job as a sales engineer, and what you get to do to serve salespeople today.
Absolutely, yeah. So, well, kind of backing out. I always knew I wanted to do something kind of out and talking to people. And even though I studied engineering, which is a little bit more technical field. I was like, hey, kind of looking around. I was like, I like the technical aspect, but I don't want to sit by a desk. And eventually ended up with like finding out about, hey, work on more of the complex sales side. So that's kind of where the sales engineering thing comes in. The Yeah, I mean, and I did it for quite some time, and now we basically are in a position where we're helping people optimize businesses, optimize their processes, build out better processes. We're a top tier CRM implementer for HubSpot, amongst other things. And a big part of that, being able to be successful there, was from my days at sales and being able to understand what really makes businesses work and what makes the sales cycle work and what does it. I leverage that experience almost every day.
And tell me about the type of companies you work with. I mean, the folks that are implementing something like HubSpot, do they tend to be more small to medium-sized businesses? Are they in the SaaS space, tech? Where do you specialize?
We work in a lot of different spaces because our methodology is, I'd say, industry agnostic, and we have
Mhm.
experience with quite a bit of industry. I mean, we've worked. I personally have experience in the construction industry. That's where I worked in, and manufacturing as well. So we work there. We do SaaS. We do real estate. We do even medical companies. I mean, we've worked kind of the gamut across e-commerce. We do a lot. We have a different division of the business where we do ads, and we do a lot of e-commerce stuff as well. So kind of run the gamut on it. But I think because going back to kind of the theme here is that we have a good system for being able to handle this, and the system
Yeah.
is agnostic to whatever the business actually is.
Mhm. And so with all the folks that you're dealing with then, teams of varying sizes, you got people on the team that are brand new, people that have been there for a long time. Where do you see salespeople falling back on hope more than they should, given that you get to work in a lot of different industries? What is that theme that you see across all clients that hope is creeping in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of times, and I've seen this firsthand too, like being in sales, and very high value sales. A lot of times people are like, look, I I could just kind of do it, and I'm gonna just hope I'm gonna remember everything, and I don't really need a system, right? I don't really need a system. I don't need a process. I'm really good. I've been doing this for a while. And it's not to say that that's fully wrong, right? But it's just like, I give the example of like, hey, maybe it was like a busy week, you put out like 20 quotes, right? But what I was doing, that's a lot. That's a crazy amount. It means you're quoting all week. But let's say you put out 20 quotes and you're like, I'm going to remember to follow up on all these. I don't need to write anything down. And you remember 18, which is honestly pretty good. That's like 90%, right?
Hmm.
But the thing is, you still missed two, and those two could have translated into business, and that could be, depending on your industry. For us, that could have been over $100,000 worth of business that you just lost because you just didn't write it down and didn't have a system personally to follow up on something, right? So I think that's kind of a common problem, because especially when they're more seasoned, they take it almost like I'm already good. Are you saying I'm not good? But no, you are good, and 90% remembering rate is pretty good. But you could also remember the other two, you know.
And are you finding this to apply with just deals or opportunities falling through the cracks? Is it across the sales cycle of these people where you could, there's probably 18 different areas where this is happening, where we can't only keep so much in our brain at one time that some of that is going to degrade, just like computer data degrades eventually.
Oh
Where do
yeah,
you
for
see that
sure.
really factoring in?
Yeah, it's definitely like across the sales cycle, and it depends on the organization and the sales, process, right? But it definitely is across the sales cycle. I just gave the example of following up because that's like the
Yeah.
easiest for, and most salespeople relate to that in some way. But I mean, let's face it, right? The things people are selling are more complex. Sales is more complex, right? It's you have big quotas, you have like numbers you have to meet, you have to like all sorts of different decision makers have to talk. Buying is more complex, all these stakeholders, right? Especially if you're doing B2B sales. Everything there's a lot of complexity there. So in order for you to be able to actually like, keep up with anything, even if your core technique and core skills and core knowledge of the product is good, is you need some sort of system. Now, a lot of times we're talking about like, hey, building a system for the company, like at the organizational level. But here today, we can focus more on talking about like, even for you as an individual, whether your organization has some system or not, how do you build out your own personal system so that you are organized enough, despite however organized your organization is, because they might not have their processes lined up, and that's fine. You can still do a good job on your own regardless.
So what Mustafa is saying for all the listeners out there is if you recognize the opportunity to perform better in any area, you don't have to wait for your organization to build this for you. This is something that you can handle as an individual performer. And when your organization begins to see, why does this person always have 100% follow-up rate on every single opportunity? They're going to wonder why. And then you can share, hey, I've got this great system. We learned it on Bulletproof Selling. You got to go talk to Mustafa about building more here at the company. So we can absolutely do that. So I think the beautiful thing about building systems is that if we understand how to identify an area of opportunity where a system could be useful, there's no spot in the sales cycle where we cannot begin to build systems. We just have to begin to prioritize where do we tackle first, because you and I well know, Mustafa, this could apply everywhere across the sales cycle, but that could get overwhelming. I know in my own business, I operate from dozens of systems that are all simultaneously running, systems that we've learned to build, so I don't lose those opportunities. But standing up dozens of systems at a time, I wouldn't want to do that in a single day. These happen over the course of weeks, months, years. So let's build a system today, Mustafa, that allows any salesperson to at least begin to take a bite out of the elephant here, to identify where is the spot where I could most use this. And let's build something that could really create results for me today. So I don't have to
Absolutely.
remember all of this stuff all of the time. Now, in the military, Mustafa, every time that we built a new system, it trimmed a little more hope away from how we operated. So here at Bulletproof Selling, we use this acronym TRIM to help salespeople build better systems too. The T in TRIM is the trigger. So I'm a salesperson. I'm out there on the front lines every day, making calls, sending emails, driving meetings, being in meetings, giving proposals, getting quotes out. What is the trigger for me to identify where a system could actually be useful for me? Because, like you said, I've been going across this without any system so far. How do I identify where a system could begin to be useful so that I can begin to build one?
I'd almost flip the question. I'd almost say,
Okay.
where is the system not useful for you, right? I used to tell,
Right, but
you know,
that's a lot of chunk to bite off at one time, though, right? I don't want
well,
to eat the elephant in one bite here.
we won't. But I just want to start with a simple explanation.
Okay.
When I started in sales, and before then, remote working wasn't as common, but it was outside sales. So, I was, amongst people I knew. I'm not really going to the office every day because I have to go out and basically find customers, right? And people were like, "Oh, that's so cool," whatever. I was like, "Listen, I mean, when you have like a non-sales job, right? You go to the office, so you go to work, but work shows up to your desk, right? You just have to show up to work, and then work shows up to your
Right.
desk. If you're project manager, whatever, somebody's like, here, manage these projects, and you don't really have to think about it. When you're in sales, yes, you don't have to go to the office. You don't have to go, to a place of work, but you have to go find work, right?
Mhm.
Right. So even just the paradigm of like how you start your day is very, very different, and that's why I like, I worked under some pretty good sales mentors, and some of the really good ones, like they understood that in order, even it starts at like even early on. I'm not explaining this for a reason, but even early on, when you're like hiring a good salesperson, one of you look mostly for personality traits, not really for necessarily experience, especially like at the entry level, right? You're looking for personality traits. Why? Because you need somebody, and you understand it's military also, you're going to look for personality traits, right? But you need somebody who can take initiative, because if they can't, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how good your manager is, it doesn't matter anything. If you're not able to have that paradigm of like, I got to get up there and take initiative, I'm going to just wait for something to happen. Well, nothing's going to happen, right? You can wait all day
Right.
and you can sit there, nothing's really going to happen. Right. So I think right off the bat, understanding that, like, hey, as a salesperson, I am the one who needs to essentially go kind of hunt, right? Or I'm not going to eat, right? Like, and understanding that mindset, I think that's the trigger, right? The trigger is like every day when I get up, how am I going to eat, right? And that has to like burn at you, if you're a good salesperson, that burns at you. People who weren't good salespeople didn't quite think of that question all that much, and then until they showed up like a month or two later, and it's like, especially for long sales cycle stuff, right? And it's like, wait, what's in your pipeline? Oh, nothing. What the hell have
Yeah.
you been doing for two? And then now it's like a really bad conversation, right? So, but you have to be really. So I think that's the trigger, right? The trigger is like you wake up in the beginning of the day. What am I going to do? What am I going to do today, right? And if you don't have your thoughts organized or a system, it's gonna be very, very overwhelming.
So then, if I'm looking at the course of my day in sales, you're
Hmm.
saying instead of approaching it from a quantity-based element, it sounds like you're telling me to tackle this from quality and that start with the first thing in my day that a system could begin to affect. And it may be finding that new lead. It may be making sure that my leads are qualified. So whatever that first thing is that I hit as a salesperson that I need to do to create more food for my table. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, exactly. And I
Okay,
would
perfect.
look, I would bucket out almost like the different types of things that I'm working on into categories, right? And it's going to depend on your role, because some sales roles are more geared towards prospecting. When I started, my role was to like take all the accounts that nobody else had. So basically, all the not established accounts. So I was basically like building these relationships from scratch, right? So some people have more established accounts, whatever, right? But it's gonna depend. But you want to break it up into like buckets, right? Like, hey, I have the business that I'm like actively pursuing, right? Like the hot leads or the jobs that are like further along. I have the business that I'm, starting to get in on, but like it's not as far along, right? So I have like the bidding type business, right?
Mhm.
And then I need to get new people into this. Like I need to build new relationships, right, with people, so I can get more of that business, right? So I'd say like bringing it up there again. It's going to depend, if you're in software sales, for example, might be a little bit different than if you're selling a product, than if you're selling, systems, whatever, right? But you're going to want to bucket your business into like at least three categories,
Mhm.
from order of like how warm to like how cold it is. And then
Gotcha.
that's gonna inform your day in the beginning. And again, you could even do this on notebook. It doesn't have to be like so overwhelming. You can even do this on notebook and be like, hey, I have five customers are really hot leads I got to follow up on. Cool, I'm gonna do that first. Okay, and I have these four that they said they might have something for me, but we weren't quite ready, so I'm gonna follow up with them and see if I can start bidding them or pricing them out. Cool. And then I now I need to find more leads too, because that's not going to be enough. So, well, where am I going to go to prospect? And that could be like kind of the next step.
It's something that I'm always telling sales teams myself because they bring me in for a very similar function, build us better systems so our folks aren't just winging it. Everybody's singing from a different sheet of music. So if the very first thing I'm doing then is looking at prioritizing, which I completely
Mhm.
agree with, right? You can build systems for those folks that are closest to becoming customers. And that way that system is handled. You can just execute, execute, execute without having to think about reinventing the wheel every time, and then move to the folks that are maybe middle of the pipeline and then earlier stage of the pipeline. So if that's my trigger, now I want to move into the repeatable. That's the R in trim. And we're
Mhm.
creating a system for creating systems, which is pretty cool, right? Most of the time we create a system specifically for some tactical execution piece on the battlefield of business, but we're creating a system just to create more systems. So walk me through maybe the 3 or 4 steps that you would tell a salesperson to engage in if they're creating a system, maybe for what do I do with my customers that are, or my prospects closest to becoming customers, or what do I do with creating better ICP, or what do I do with qualifying? What are those 3 to 4 steps that you would just use for system builds across the entire sales cycle?
Gotcha. So yeah, first, yeah, I would obviously organize them, like I said, and then I would look at, um, and this is something that I mean, if I'm talking to somebody, I would ask them a bunch of questions and I'd give them specific advice, right? But if this is something that you should know as a rep, based on what you're doing, right? So, for example, you know that like, okay, the people that are far along, and the job is hot. It's like you know that I need to follow up, I need to negotiate, I need to maybe give them, make sure we're at the right number. I need to like talk to them. I need to convince other stakeholders because the first stakeholder is convinced, right? So you have like kind of a list of things that you should know need to be done at that. And let's say you don't. What I would do is, and this is good advice if you're starting in sales or you're like more junior, is ask somebody who's senior, who's really good. Can I
Mm,
shadow you for a day? Right. I did that a lot. I learned a ton that way because I was fortunate enough to start in a team that was like very, very good at the time. Later, people left and stuff, so not necessarily, experience wasn't as much, but still good people. But anyways, I noticed that like early on, like I was young and just kind of noticed that. And I was like, oh, these people really know their stuff. So I was like, all right, let me go. But hey, can I come with you for the day? Can I come with you for the day? Can I come with you for the day? Can I come with? And then I can observe actually different sales strategies too, and then see what works for me. Like not everything's gonna work for me, but and some things might work for me that might not work for the other guy. Maybe I'm better able to talk about a product or whatever, so I can lead more in that, whatever, right? But still being able to like see like, hey, what works or what not. And one of the things I learned too is that there's actually a wide array of things that can work. There is no one thing that has to work. We had people who were maybe very, very, very knowledgeable about the product, and maybe weren't necessarily as outgoing. And we had people who maybe were like, relied on like, they knew some about the products, but not as much, but they were like very, very good at negotiating, for example. Right. And it was like, oh, okay, like these guys are both almost equally as good. And it's not really, it's about playing to your strengths and knowing what the different plays are. You don't have to have one set play. Right. So I think that's really important. I think, finding out what needs to be done. So that's just a recap. First, breaking up the different types of contacts that you have, in a given day, because ultimately sales, you're talking to people, right? So just simplify the different types of people or companies that I'm talking to. We talked about the buckets, but then two, find out what you need to do for people in each bucket. So either you might know
mhm.
that, you might think of a deal that you had that went really well. What did you do there, right? Oh, I made sure to call all the decision makers before, putting out the final price, for example. All right, so then put that down. But if you don't know, and even if you do know, honestly, I would go to somebody more senior, somebody knowledgeable, and I just make sure to shadow people for a day. I like to do that. I would honestly shadow everybody that's good, for one day, because you just learn new things, right? It doesn't mean that you're not good. It doesn't mean that, one person's better than the other. It just, you can learn new things, that way. I always thought I mean, it was something like I watched when I was a kid, and there was like this villain that like, he was very weak, but he only had one ability, and the ability was the ability to get other abilities. So like if he
Yeah,
went up against somebody, he can get their ability, and then he became like the strongest thing like in that universe or whatever. Yeah, it was like a game. But anyways, so I always thought that was like really interesting. Like if you can sit there and observe everybody, and you can actually get a little piece of their ability through your observation, you can be the best person in the entire thing, right? So
yeah.
that's an
And so
interesting lesson.
we've got a couple awesome steps. Then I'm going to recap for myself as well, because these are
Yeah.
great system build steps for anybody, even those of us that build systems for a living. Which is break your folks out into different buckets, outline the steps that you would want to take for each of those buckets at that stage of the sales cycle, and this could be across the entire sales cycle. By the way, you mentioned ask senior salespeople what steps they would take, shadow them, mirror them, and pay attention to maybe what steps you missed. Just because you've been there 6 months doesn't mean you know everything that the guy that's been there for 15 years knows. And maybe you've been there for 15 years and you need to go to one of your peers that just is exceptional at always driving that first meeting. Better close rate than you do on those. I want to learn from that person too. And you mentioned choose what is going to work for you. Choose what plays into your strengths, your personality. That's a great step that a lot of salespeople skip, and they wonder, why is it so miserable for me to execute this system? I hate it every single time. I avoid it, in fact. probably because you built a system that doesn't play to your strength. But now, the final step in this, I want to make sure we get, which is how do I make sure I use this system? Where does it live? There's no wrong answer here because, again, it's going to play to your strengths. But I know as a HubSpot guy, you probably recommend let's keep a fair amount of this stuff inside HubSpot as a flow, as a task set. But where would you recommend salespeople begin storing this so I don't have to keep this 8-step process for driving leads in this particular vertical in the sales cycle in my head? Where does it need to live?
Yeah. So normally, right, if we're talking at the organizational level, like kind of top down system building, then yes, I would say let's build our CRM around that, right? But in this case, we're going a different approach where we're talking kind of bottom up. Like, hey, I'm a rep, I want to fix my own, day to day, irrespective of what my organization does. And we're assuming that they might not have the best systems, or maybe they do. So if the case that they do, then yeah, I mean, you could definitely lay things out in your CRM. If you have HubSpot, if you have whatever, you can kind of lay things out there. But honestly, I mean, you don't even have to do that, right? You could actually, I mean, you can do something as simple as a spreadsheet, honestly.
Yes.
Again, if let's just say you're like, hey, like, look, they don't want to use CRM, they're not using one, or the one they have sucks, and I just want to do something that I can control fully on my own. So in that case, right, you can use something like as simple as a spreadsheet, and kind of just like put your stuff out there. You could even write. But then what you like. I personally like flowcharts a lot, so we do a lot of flowcharting of like mapping out like, hey, what's supposed to happen where. But if you like that, you could do that, or you could like write a little document, not too long. It's not really about the number of words or whatever, just one page or something of like, here's what I aspire to do. And if you ever just tangential but related, if you ever took anything on like SMART goals or whatever, you should like take a lot of like classes on that or courses on that when I was young. Anyways, one of the things that really helps with like doing a goal, any goal, a personal goal, whatever, is just writing it down. It's actually crazy how much this like helps. You would think it doesn't. Like I did a simple one recently where it's like, hey, I want to go on the treadmill for X amount of time, and I would do it without writing it down. It didn't work. Then I wrote it down, and all of a sudden it works. Like it just it's great. You mark down like the days you did it, and it works. Like I did something really simple. I just wrote it on the notes on my phone, and I did like a little grid where I can just say check mark every day, and that's it.
I'd say most importantly, get it out of your head. Because if
Yeah.
it's in your head, you are no better off than you were before. You kind of know
Yeah.
what steps to take, but you stay up late the night before. The extra shot of whiskey at the bar. You will begin to degrade your memory and your performance. So absolutely get it outside your head. So we've got a really good system built so far. We got the trigger, making it repeatable for how do you develop a system out of repeatable steps. Now the iron trim is making sure this thing is improvable, because I want to get better at building systems in the future. And
Mhm.
because we're talking about systems that could apply anywhere across the sales cycle, how would you recommend a salesperson improves not the systems themselves, but how they go about building them?
Yeah. So this goes actually to the next thing that I was going to say is really important, which is having like checkpoints or like some sort of cadence, right? So you want to have these checkpoints to make sure that you're looking at things. And again, it's not just in this, it applies in life too. Like, right, people want to have a New Year's resolution. It's a checkpoint to be like, what did I do last year, right? So having these like checkpoints, and again, you can write that down in your little document, like, hey, so every day I'm going to do these things. But every week, I'm going to review how it went last week, right? Because you need like that data to be able to tell. And the way to improve systems is always data, like, right? How did it go? And then where did I go wrong? Like, okay, I called all these people and they said that I lost the job. Okay, well, why did I lose the job? Well, because whatever, our price was too high. Or okay, then I need to add a step that I do a little bit of a better job discovering where the budget needs to be before I quote them, for example, right? And that's kind of like the reflection piece. So I'd say having that cadence really important, or that checkpoints, right? So daily, you're going to do the actual actions. Weekly, you might want to do like a quick review of like what happened last week, and then monthly, you can really like deep dive. Like you can kind of set even one way a lot of us use our calendars. Just set an hour on your calendar every month. Like I'm gonna just sit down, clear my desk, clear everything. Usually I would do Mondays, but you can do whatever Friday if it's better for you. But probably beginning or end of the week is just the best. And I'm gonna clear everything, and I'm gonna just like, okay, what happened? And like, am I better off this month than the month before? What do I need to improve? Am I sticking to my goals? Like, and that. So the checkpoints are really, really, really important.
And I'd say out of those checkpoints, what you'll discover, because I do the same process for myself, I'll notice that if I'm really performing well in some area, I want to know why. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a system that I can build to make sure that I get more of those results later. or if I notice I'm dropping off, I keep losing deals for the same reasons again and again and again. It just keeps happening. Maybe I need a system there so that I can, when I hear that response next time, hey, listen, we don't have the budget or whatever excuse it is that I'm hearing, I can execute a system against it. I understand you don't have the budget. Let's dive into that. So the next time you have budget, or how can I help you find the budget? Or I've worked with clients that didn't have the budget. Here's what we had to do to make this happen. You could develop a system against just about anything that you're encountering to make sure you are getting better. But it won't happen, to Moustafa's point, unless you take the time to sit down and take that internal inventory. Where am I getting better? Where do I need to improve? So we've gotten the T, the R, the I here. Let's move into the final element of this acronym, which is the M, to measure. I want to make sure that I'm measuring the results of these systems so that it's better than what I was doing before, which is winging it. Because as you and I know, Moustafa, there's a little bit of onboarding time with systems. I could have been making maybe another 3 calls in the time it takes me to pull up my spreadsheet, look at the system I'm supposed to use. So I am going to notice a slight drop in performance before I really start to see the gains. How am I going to measure the success of the systems that I'm building? Is it just in top line revenue? Is it leading indicators? What do you recommend I track to make sure that using systems is better than not using systems?
Yeah, I think, in specific instances, right, depends on the metrics and goals that you set for yourself, depending on your role. And again, this is one of those scenarios where, like, if I was talking to rep in X industry, I'd be like, ask a bunch of questions and we come up with like some metrics. But broadly, you do want to have, revenue is going to obviously be a big one. Close rate, there's a few metrics that I think are going to be kind of more universal. And you do want to have those written out. Again, back to like the original document, you want to have those written out. So we're kind of 3 things that you want to write in the document: the steps that you're going to take every day, right? Like how you're going to, including how you're going to categorize the different people that you need to call for that day or whatever. The checkpoint cadence that you're going to do, right? What are you doing daily? What are you doing weekly? What are you doing monthly? And then the third thing is like the success metrics, right? Like, okay, my goal is to do X, right? So I think that's important. And then being able to put in all the information that you need to kind of see that is important. So if you're like, hey, I want to improve my close rate, well, then you need somewhere where you have a list of jobs that you bid and a list of jobs that you closed, right? So again, if you already have a CRM, great. I mean, you just export them and look at it, or ask somebody to make you a view, whatever. If you don't and you're going to code on your own, then you can spreadsheet it, and just every time since you know that this is important, every time you bid a job, just write it down, and then at the end of the month, just look and be like, oh, I close this, I didn't close this, whatever, right? But knowing what you need to track is important, because if let's say it's not important, let's say close rate is not important for you. I can't imagine a scenario where it's not, but let's just say it's not. Well, then you maybe won't write the jobs you bid. Maybe you're going to focus on something else, right? So, or maybe let's say the number of people who picked up their phones isn't like that important of a metric for you. Like, let's say you're cold calling, then maybe you're not going to write that down, right? You're going to save your energy doing something else. So understanding that and being able to write down the information that you need, or have the information that you need to get that number, is really, really key. And I'd add that to the monthly review too, honestly. Like, hey, maybe write for yourself a little note at the end of the monthly review, like, here's what I observed and here's the numbers, right? Like, just a quick 1 paragraph summary, nothing too long. So you can go back month by month and be like, oh, okay, what did I do 2 months ago? Oh, wow, man, I can't believe I was that bad. Like, I'm actually really improving. Like, then you can actually see, like, your progress. It's almost like keeping, like, on people trying to lose weight or do whatever, they keep like a log, and then they go back and they're like, man, I can't believe I was like that. What? Like, and now I'm here, and that's amazing. And like, it's good to like see that as well.
Oh, yeah, we always tend to overestimate what we can do in a day, but we underestimate what happens over time, months,
Yes.
quarters, and years.
Yes.
So I completely agree with you, man. Well, this is a great system build for how to actually build systems. It's kind of like the underlying code of sales systems. You got it right here, probably for the first time at Bulletproof Selling, how you can create a system across any area of your sales cycle. Moustafa, you get to do this for companies. If people want to get deeper into your world, they want to get you on board with their organization. How do we get deeper into that world? How do we learn more about you? How do we connect, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. So you guys definitely check out our website, pushanalytics.com. And I would say if you want us to come to your organization, help build out systems, shoot us an email at hello. It's very easy. hello@pushanalytics.com, and put in the title that you came from Bulletproof Selling. So that way the team knows to like route it to me. And we'll happily even do a process consult, with whoever, from your organization stakeholder. We could do kind of process consult to see where you guys are at today, and where we can drive improvements. And we can do that like at, no cost for people who are listening to the show. So definitely put that in there, and, we'll make sure to route it accordingly. And we'd love to get you building up your systems for success.
Awesome, man. Well, if you're listening to this show, you obviously believe in the power of systems. So take Moustafa up on that offer. For those of you catching this on the live stream, make sure you're subscribing to that YouTube channel. Or if you're listening on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere the podcast can be found, leave us a review and let other folks know hope no longer has to be part of your sales strategy. And here at Bulletproof Selling, with the help of great sales leaders like Moustafa, you can remove hope one system at a time. Moustafa, thanks for giving back to the sales community, sir, today. And let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.